My name is Andrew Bahari. I'm a deacon at the Coptic Orthodox Church. And what we'll be doing in this video is we're going to be debunking the top 10 lies that are spoken about the Oriental Orthodox. And the Oriental Orthodox is a unity comprised of 6 churches. The Coptic Orthodox, which I'm a part of. We have the Eritrean Orthodox, the Ethiopian Orthodox, Malankara Indian, we have Syrian, and we have Armenian. And what we'll be doing is we'll be playing a clip of one of our opponents saying a lie about us, and I will be rebutting that clip. And so the first one is the claim that we are monophysites.
The response of Dioscorus was then, oh, you did that? Okay, I'll go to the next step and I'll excommunicate you too. So what happened after Ephesus 2? Constantinople excommunicated, higher than Alexandria. Antioch excommunicated, and then now Rome. So you have 3 major patriarchs excommunicated. Why? Because of a monophysite heretic. That's why.
So with that said, dear ones, I can't see how we're close to union. I mean, for one, the Monophysites, and I am calling them that because they still believe in one nature. They don't believe that Christ's humanity was completely obliterated like the original Monophysites did, who were given that name. But mono and mia mean the same thing.
Now, what is a monophysite? A monophysite is someone who believes that Christ has a soul nature. And that's distinct from a miaphysite, because what miaphysites believe is that Christ has one nature. So there is a difference here between soul and one. To have a soul nature means that there's no composition. And this was a error that was brought up by someone named Eutyches. And Eutyches is someone who was a part of early church history, and there's some history where Eutyches gave an Orthodox confession of the faith, and because he gave an Orthodox confession of the faith, Pope Dioscorus, who is the Coptic Pope of Alexandria at that time, exonerated him, which means he allowed him into the church. But he was later condemned again for being unorthodox later. And what Eutyches said, what Eutychianism is it's the idea that Christ's divinity swallowed up Christ's humanity. The Miaphysites, who are the Oriental Orthodox, don't believe that. We believe that Christ is fully divine and fully human, and one of the natures didn't consume or swallow up the other. So anytime they call us monophysite, which means a soul nature, like Eutyches believed, that Christ had one soul nature, which is the divine nature, is not what we, the Oriental, believe in. Now, the second lie that is said about the Oriental Orthodox is that we have a logical problem where we can't answer the question whether Christ's one soul nature is created or uncreated, because what our opponents will say is that if Christ has one soul nature that is created, that means it's not divine. And they'll also say that if Christ has one nature that is uncreated, then it can't be human. This is what our opponents will say about us, the Oriental Orthodox. And they say that if we, the Oriental Orthodox, confess that the one composite nature of Christ, which we, the Oriental Orthodox, believe in, has both created and uncreated attributes, that we would at that point be saying the same thing that they're saying.
One of the arguments that I will make against, and this is kind of like a popular argument you see from St. Maximus the Confessor in Leon to Jerusalem, is just asking, okay, if Christ is one nature, is this nature created or is it uncreated? Mm-hmm. If it is created, it's not divine. If it's uncreated, it's not human. If it's both, there's a problem here, because one thing in and of itself cannot simultaneously be created and uncreated at the same time, right? It must have one is a different kind of a property from the other that corresponds to the nature. So by saying both, you're saying Christ has 2 natures. And at that point, You're basically saying, okay, the Orthodox are correct, we are wrong, right? So that's kind of, that doesn't really help.
However, that's not true. And that's where it becomes erroneous, because we do believe that Christ's one nature is both created and uncreated. And the way we can believe that is because we believe that Christ's one nature is a composite nature. It is composed of 2 natures. We say in Tisbeha, which is the Coptic midnight praises, that there is one nature out of two. And then we continue on, we say a holy divinity co-essential with the Father and incorruptible. So there is one composite nature, which is both created and uncreated, because it is one out of two. So that's the second lie. Now, the third lie is that, oh, we're just saying the same thing. You know, the Eastern Orthodox and the Oriental Orthodox are really just saying the same thing, and there's no difference in what we believe.
Because it turns out that the Christology of the Oriental Orthodox Church, which is known as Miaphysite Christology or Miaphysite Christology, that Christology is indeed the Christology that was taught by the Council of Chalcedon in 451.
The Orientals believe in Miaphysitism, a fancy word meaning that Christ has one nature which is both human and divine. On the other hand, the Eastern Orthodox believe that Christ has two natures that are distinct. What are the practical implications of this difference? To be honest, I actually don't know. It kind of sounds like they're saying the same thing, but someone correct me if I'm wrong.
At first glance, that seems to be true, because what the Eastern Orthodox and the Catholics say is that Christ is one person, two natures. Whereas us, the Oriental Orthodox, what we say is Christ is one nature, fully divine and fully human, one composite nature in one person. So this might seem like, oh, it's semantics, like what really is the difference? But there are huge differences and implications to saying that Christ has two natures in one person. This leads, for example, to a heresy called Nestorianism. I recorded another video about that. I'll link it here, I'll put it on the screen somewhere, about how if you say two natures in one person, that leads to Nestorianism. And so we're not saying the same thing. They're completely different things. Now, the fourth lie that the Eastern Orthodox and our opponents will say about us is that Christ is someone who is part of the Trinity, and the Trinity has three people, and so the Oriental Orthodox believe that each person of the Trinity is a separate God. And so they say that us, the Oriental Orthodox, believe that there are three gods, that each person of the Trinity is a separate God.
The problem with the Coptic confusion over universals and particulars is that as a result, well, there's no longer one divine nature, but there's three divinities. And as a result, you could rightly level them with the charge of being tritheistic. So they would believe in three gods who are only united in the name God.
If all a person is just a particular instantiation of a nature and nothing else, and it's basically a particular nature, then the Trinity being three persons is three particular natures, meaning that there are three gods. And there wasn't any good sufficient response to this, because he's just, logically following the conclusion of Monophysite Christology and working into Trinitarian theology.
Now, why do they say this? The reason why they say this is because there was a man named John Philoponus who was an Alexandrian, and he was something called a proto-nominalist. And what a proto-nominalist is it's someone who was saying that natures exist in particulars. And nominalism is a philosophy. I'll explain this in 1 second. Nominalism is a philosophy expounded by someone named William of Ockham later on in Europe, way later on in Europe. And so Philoponus was already, much before the time of William Ockham, espousing this idea that natures exist in particulars. Now, I'll give you an example of what that means. I'm a human. I have human nature. And so that nature only exists within me, the particular. I'm looking at a camera right now, right? And so this camera has camera nature, and that camera nature exists only within the camera. This is kind of distinct from Platonism and Platonic realism, where someone like Plato would say that these universal principles like human nature or camera-ness or microphone-ness or the number 7 or the number 18 exist in something called the realm of forms outside of any particular thing or instance or person even. And John Philoponus said no, the natures exist in the particulars, and he applied this idea to God. So if you apply the idea to God, that natures exist in particulars, and there are three particular people that are in the one God, that is the Trinity, then each person would have its own nature, according to John Philoponus. So then if there are three natures, there would be three gods. Now here's the thing about this idea and John Philoponus. Us Oriental Orthodox condemn him. He's not a saint. We don't accept his ideas at all. And so this is something that is a complete straw man, and it's not something that the Oriental Orthodox subscribe to whatsoever. Now, the next lie is the lie that the Eastern Orthodox will say about us Oriental Orthodox, which is that Christ changed, God changed.
Then she goes and calls Christ's nature composite. Well, here's the thing. The nature, the interactive principle, being composite, does immediately imply confusion and change. So if he has a composite nature, this means his divine nature has now been altered. It has become divino-human. And as a result, by adding a created element to the uncreated nature, it becomes a created nature. Christ undergoes a mutation.
And the reason they say this is because they say, oh, well, if Christ has a fully divine and fully human nature, then when there was a union with the human nature, that means God changed. That's kind of what they say about us. But that's not true, because we do not believe that Christ's humanity subsides within his divinity, or that it exists coming from his divinity. But that is exactly what that's exactly what the Eastern Orthodox believe. The Eastern Orthodox believe that Christ's humanity can find subsistence in the divinity at the incarnation. And if the humanity exists or subsides within the divinity, that would mean the divinity has changed. And so the claim that they lobby at us, that we believe that God changed, can be said about them. And this is something that is said by their saint John of Damascus. That is not a saint in the Oriental Orthodox Church. And I can quote this if you ask me for it. Now, the next lie is they will say that the Oriental Orthodox in ancient history held a robber council, and they're talking about Ephesus 2. And they'll say that Ephesus 2 is a robber council, and that there was violence that occurred there, and there might have been stealing and robbery that occurred there.
This council was a mess too, famously known as the Robbers' Council, as it was convened with no time for any of the representatives from the West to get there, and so it was run almost entirely by Monophysites from the East. They proceed to excommunicate and condemn everybody even remotely connected with Nestorius. And then they went even further and basically declared that the only correct way to see Christ was as having one nature. And of course, this sets off everybody. The Pope was livid. The bishops that were excluded were furious. And it goes without saying that those who got excommunicated or condemned without having any say in the matter were a little put out as well.
The Council of Chalcedon, the Fourth Ecumenical Council, was convoked in 451 AD to deal with the shrapnel of the infamous Robber Council, the Second Council of Ephesus.
Now, the reason why the Eastern Orthodox call Ephesus 2 a robber council is because at Ephesus 2, there was a pope named Pope Leo. Hello, I'm editing this video right now, and I just noticed that I said that Pope Leo was at Ephesus 2. What I meant to say was at this time, not at Ephesus 2. And this was the Bishop of Rome at this time. And he had a book. It was really a letter called the Tome of Leo. And the Tome of Leo was not read at this meeting, this council, which is called Ephesus 2. And Pope Leo, because he was self-important and thought that his tome should be read, how dare they not read my tome? That's usurping of my position. This is the way he thought. Even though at this time, the Bishop of Rome, who was Pope Leo, was considered the first among equals. And to this day, even in the Oriental Orthodox Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, both of these churches still see bishops as first among equals. Even you could look at the first among equals for the Oriental Orthodox, who's Pope Tewedros of Alexandria. He's the first among equals with everyone else that is part of the Oriental Orthodox Union. Same is said with the Eastern Orthodox with Bartholomew, Pope Bartholomew. He is the first among equals amongst the Eastern Orthodox. And so this is a tradition we've held onto since ancient history. And Pope Leo was like, no, I'm not first among equals. I'm first, period. I'm on top. I'm head honcho. How dare you not read my tome? They robbed me of my position. And so Pope Leo, who was an opponent of Ephesus II, because Ephesus II went against his tome, called it a robber council. And then the Eastern Orthodox ran with it throughout the millennia and throughout the centuries. And then all of these stories about, oh, there was violence at the council and actual robbery started cropping up, but there's no evidence of this whatsoever. Now, the next lie, this one's funny, is that Cyril was at Chalcedon.
For the Syriacs and the Coptics, for the Oriental Christians, physis means person. That is how Saint Cyril of Alexandria used that term at the Council of Chalcedon.
Saint Cyril died in the year 444 AD, and Pope Dioscoros replaced him. The Council of Chalcedon occurred at 451 AD. So then the next lie is that Dioscoros didn't attend the Council of Chalcedon, which is blatantly false.
Our situation with what's called the Oriental Orthodox. The Fourth Ecumenical Council in Chalcedon in 451 gathered the churches to address the heresies, the continuing problem of the heresy of Arius, which was even addressed from the First Ecumenical Council, but as well as Nestorius. And there, as throughout history, there are always kind of political pressures, language pressures, and one of those worldly pulls, of course, to divide and to destroy. The council gathered to address these issues and pronounced for us the truth of faith with regards to Christology, the natures of Christ. And Jesus Christ is one person with two natures. He is fully God and fully man, a human nature and a divine nature, without confusion, without mixture, and so on. The Coptic patriarch the Patriarch of Alexandria did not attend this conference, the ecumenical gathering.
If anyone references the minutes or the records of the Council of Chalcedon, it's very clear that Pope Dioscoros of Alexandria attended Chalcedon. Now, why might they make this claim? What they're really doing is they're twisting the truth, because Dioscoros didn't attend his own disposition, because Dioscoros was deposed, meaning excommunicated, and stripped of his rank at Chalcedon. And during his own disposition, he didn't attend because he's like, listen, you guys are going to dispose me anyway, just go ahead and do it. And so he didn't attend his disposition, but he was there and he was present at the Council of Chalcedon throughout up until that point. Now, the next slide that they'll say about the Oriental Orthodox is this one is from Craig Trulia. He says that the Oriental Orthodox go against a canon, which is a law that was established at the Second Ecumenical Council called Constantinople I, in which the law was that bishops can't go beyond their diocese. And he's accusing us of doing this. But this doesn't make sense. And the reason why he's accusing us of doing this is because, like I said earlier, we've had this tradition since ancient history that there is a first among equals. For the Oriental Orthodox, that's our Pope Tewedros, the Coptic Pope. And for the Eastern Orthodox, that is Bartholomew. And so both of these traditions have a first among equals. And the reason why we even had to have Pope Tewedros as our first among equals is because of the schism between the Oriental Orthodox and the Eastern Orthodox to begin with. Because of this unfortunate schism that occurred, we had to now establish a first among equals. So this critique, this slide doesn't make any sense. Now the 10th and final one is that nature means person.
The Oriental Christians were obviously confused because they saw the Council of Chalcedon affirming the Council of Ephesus, but then in their language and in their theology, to them it seemed like they were teaching Nestorianism. Why? So here's where the confusion comes in. The reason that the Orientals split from the rest of the church at the Council of Chalcedon is because of one word and one word only, and that word was physis. The one word physis is the word that caused the split between the Orientals and the Chalcedonian Christians. Why? Well, it was all over a big misunderstanding. You see, the word physis was used in two different ways. It was used in one way by the Greeks and the Latins, but it was used in another way by the Syriacs and the Coptics, the Orientals. You see, physis for the Syriacs and the Coptics, for the Oriental Christians, physis means person.
Now, we never said, and nowhere throughout the early writings of the early church fathers did we imply that nature meant person. This is silly. Now, there was a change in terminology, and this did happen at the Council of Chalcedon, which the Oriental Orthodox don't accept, in which, in order to appear or try to appear like the canons and doctrines of Chalcedon are consistent with everything else in the early church prior to that point, they changed the word meaning instantiation, which in the Greek is hypostasis, to mean person. And they did this because they wanted to say two natures in one hypostasis. Okay? Because if they formulated it in a different way, it becomes very clear their Nestorianism. And so they had to change the terms in order to try to avoid, which they failed to do. And you could see this in my previous videos, especially the one about the Eastern Orthodox being Nestorian. They failed to do this. And we never had this mingling of definitions.